Rosalind Carter has a quote that's really, really true. And it says that there are 4 kinds of folks in the world: people who have been caregivers, people who are caregivers now, people who will be caregivers at some point, and people who need caregiving. So next we're going to hear from some New Hampshire caregivers, and as they come up to the stage with me. Great, thanks. And they are going to share their stories, and these stories will sound familiar to some of you, I'm sure, because they'll talk about some decisions that they've made, when to add paid caregivers into their families, into the support systems, I mean. They'll talk about the hardship or impact to their families. They're going to talk about the impact to their jobs, but they'll also talk about the rewards and the benefits of being a caregiver. And I'm very, very happy to say that our own Dick Sheverfields, who knows Dick Sheverfields? Yay! Is here to moderate the panel today. And as you know, Dick worked at AARP, but nowadays he's volunteer extraordinaire, and we are very, very excited that he lends his elder expertise to the Alliance for Healthy Aging. So please join me in welcoming the panel.
Hello, everybody. Okay, I haven't done this in a long time, so you're going to have to bear with me a little bit. Thank you, Yvonne. And thank all of you for joining us for the Caregiver Stories panel. And I'm also going to change it a little bit and say caregiver or care partner. In a lot of instances, it's a care partner, one person who's providing care and the other person. And they partner together to create an environment that helps establish a strong balance. The focus of today is on family caregiving, and that's unpaid care. About 20 years ago, I used to talk about caregiving, and I used to say that 85 to 90% of care is provided by family caregivers, the natural caregiving system. And for purposes of common understanding, I'm going to read to you a definition of family care partners: a relative, a partner, a friend, or a neighbor who has a personal relationship and provides a broad range of assistance for an older person or an adult. So it's unpaid care, it's somebody that we know, and every one of us in the audience tonight, or this afternoon, has been or will be a caregiver and be very intimate with the caregiving process. The panel objectives bring it down to that point. We want you to walk away and recognize and understand the challenges and importance of family caregiving. I'm going to briefly introduce our panel, and then I'm going to frame the conversation a little bit after I introduce them briefly. Then they're going to come back on and each share with you their stories. Leslie Melby, raise your hand. Rebecca Rule, Wilberto Torres, Vishnu Gurang, and Vola. And Vola is with us tonight because Vishnu requires an interpreter, someone to do translation. And we'll get in, I'll give you a little bit more information on each of our panelists in a minute. I wanted to start off sort of framing the conversation that we have tonight with a quote from a blog. This is a retired Navy individual by the name of Ray. And it's a blog that really targets caregiving. Taking care of my mother was the hardest thing I ever had to do in my life. When I was in the United States Navy, I had the second most dangerous job in the world by working the flight deck of an aircraft carrier. Yes, it was harder than that. Taking care of my mother was a 24-hour-a-day job. I didn't have anywhere near enough support to take care of her, and I was neglecting myself. So please, if you can, help. And I think that sort of sums it up, and I think some of the stories that you're going to hear just sort of reinforce that message that Ray shares with us. I want to share a little bit of the demographics of caregiving or care partnering. 40 million caregivers in the United States today, 40 million caregivers. 17.7 million caregivers are providing care to people 65 years of age and older. In the state of New Hampshire, 178,000 caregivers here right in our own state. The value of that care is $2.3 billion on an annual basis. When you think of that, the dollar value, it represents 161 million hours of care that's provided. So when you think of care that's provided to an aging population, when you think of care that's provided to an adult population, what a significant impact that family caregiver brings to the equation of helping people. Before I share with you the vision of where we'd like to go, I just want to do a commercial right now for the Endowment for Health. Because I think I've been in the business for almost 45, 50 years of services to people. And the endowment has stepped up a couple of years ago and really began to create a focus on the aging population. And Yvonne mentioned a little bit earlier, they planted the seed for the Alliance for Healthy Aging that in turn planted the seed for caregiving. And I'm going to ask you in a few minutes to consider being part of that caregiving committee and working on some of these issues that are so critical to support the 178,000 folks that are providing care in our state. I mentioned vision. So as you're thinking about the future, and in a minute I'm going to give you a task, a challenge, and a responsibility. So be ready. And close the doors, please, out back. The vision is all family caregivers are confident in identifying as caregivers, are confident in identifying as caregivers, are aware that help is available, and can easily access that help. If we can take and activate that vision into a system where people feel confident that they are caregivers, that they're aware of the services and supports that are available to them, and can access those, we've come a long, long way. Now, your charge and your responsibility. I hope that when you leave this evening with this panel and the next panel to come, you gain some insight into the role of caregiver, care partner. That you begin to think about ways in which you can activate the vision that we just spoke to. And then thirdly, I want you to ask the question, so what? So what? So what can I do to support a person who provides care, who's being a caregiver yourself? Begin a discussion in your place of business or your community about caregiving and the role that your employees play in providing that care and what you can do as a business or an industry. Join the Alliance for Healthy Aging Caregiving Work Group, and I'll be standing out back with a pad at the end of the evening. And advocate. And I had a lovely conversation this week with a friend and talked about, caregiving takes on many different flavors. It's not the Rays of the world where they're working for 24 hours providing care. It may be monitoring care. It may be advocating for care. There's a continuum of care opportunities that our family caregivers and our family care partners provide. So please think about that. So don't walk away from this evening without making a commitment to yourself to become an activist on behalf of people, to become an activist beyond caregivers, for caregivers. Now I'd like to go to the real people and the real stories. Each person is going to have 5 minutes, and then at the end of that, we'll have an opportunity for questions that will be posed to the panelists. And I will be posing those questions based on some of the issues that they raise. Leslie Melby is a care partner with her husband, David, and Leslie has been and is employed full-time right now. And Leslie, along with her daughter, Lauren, and David, really are partners in helping their care responsibility. So Leslie.
Am I supposed to go up there? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dick. Thank you, everyone, and many thanks to the endowment for bringing us all together. This is a tremendous opportunity, and my hope is that today marks the beginning of many more conversations and raises awareness and creates solutions. And I just want to share a quick story that from my past, a long time ago, and it just gives you an idea of how far we've come in terms of caregiving. 44 years ago, my father was diagnosed with progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP, so those of you in the audience in the clinical world know what I'm talking about. It's a very debilitating degenerative disease that destroys the brain cells that affect walking and many other muscular functions. My mother, who was 51 at the time, my father was 55, had no clue what to do. And I call this the dark ages of caregiving. We didn't use the term caregiving. My mother was really at a loss, and they struggled to survive, basically. Herb and Harriet Kaplan were proud members of the Greatest Generation, and so did they ask for help? Of course not. But they managed, and after 8 years, my father passed, and it was an awful experience. And I hope and I know that no one has to go through that today because of the efforts and how far we've come. My husband, David, was diagnosed 4 years ago with Alzheimer's, and he was diagnosed pretty early in the process, which at the time I think was unusual, but as care partner, I insisted we have to figure out what's going on here. And at that point in our journey, I was more of an advocate. I didn't think of myself as a caregiver. In fact, prior to receiving the diagnosis, David had been to his PCP by himself, not with me, and had gone there for some reason and said, oh, by the way, I really feel I'm having some difficulty with memory. And the response that he got was, you're 62, you're having senior moments. And so he came home and, basically reported to me what had happened. Several months later, he had another issue, went back to the doctor and said, oh, by the way, I'm having memory issues, and basically was met with the same response. And at this point, I knew something was going on, and so I got into advocate mode and visited our PCP myself and described the situation from my perspective and demanded that we have neuropsychological testing, and then he said, yeah, we need an MRI. We floundered for 6 months, and for someone who's been in the healthcare field, not from a clinical area, but in health policy, I was surprised to find myself at a loss in navigating the system, particularly in this area of what seemed to be just a fog. The neuropsych testing revealed that David had mild cognitive impairment. And what was interesting at that point was that we had the results and we understood that there were some issues with executive functions, that being planning and organizing. So we, on our own, and in 2020 hindsight, I don't know why, I guess I thought I was pretty competent at figuring this out, looked at the report, and the report suggested that he have memory techniques, some form of cognitive therapy. And so we went down that road. Unfortunately, it was an unnecessary 6 months that we basically floundered. And so then we got to the next stage of where I, for the first time, asked for help. And I asked my daughter, Lauren, who's here, by the way, and she was working at Mass General at the time, and I said, I think we need a neurologist who specializes in memory disorders find one. And what was amazing was that she not only found a specialist, she found a world-renowned memory and dementia specialist, Dr. Ali Reza Atri, who was at Mass General at the time. And he's not there in case any of you are thinking, you know, oh, I know someone, I want to send them to Dr. Atri. You'll have to go to San Francisco. He is now heading up the Ray Dolby Memory Center at California Pacific Medical Center. We finally got in to see Dr. Atri, and the very first thing that he said to us was, "I will be your advisor." I'll never forget those words, and I still get this very warm feeling when I think about that, because it was the first time that we as a family, David, Lauren, and I together, felt that someone was there to help us. He suggested that, he said, after 2 hours, or after today, after our visit today, you're going to be really sick of me because we're going to be together for about 2 hours. Are you kidding me? 2 hours with a specialist at Mass General. And indeed, we did spend 2 hours together. And he educated us, and he explained that many other conditions needed to be ruled out before we could get to a definitive diagnosis. So after several weeks, we went through a variety of tests, scans, sleep study, blood work, and then ultimately lumbar puncture. In the lumbar puncture, there's spinal fluid, neural spinal fluid that would eventually reveal the tau and the amyloid that's involved with Alzheimer's. And at that point, I still didn't see myself as I'm not a caregiver. David looks and acts the same, and he's doing great, and he's, despite the fact that after he was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, he retired. He was very active, involved in purposeful activity. And so I want to share with you another lesson that I learned, and that is denial is a very strong and very powerful state of mind, and it will keep the caregiver or care partner from moving forward. But eventually we moved out of denial and into a more proactive mode. And since that time, we have been busy living our lives, but also finding that over time there are a lot of responsibilities that I have taken over. And it's a process that is iterative, it's gradual. When I think about the future, it's difficult to envision what lies ahead, and so I take the advice of some very wise people who are in the support groups in which I participate, who said just one day at a time. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and I've said this before to a number of people, when we were at Mass General, we were referred to the social worker in the memory disorders program. Her name was Barbara, and she said, if there's one thing I tell you, it's you must join a support group. You must find a support group, or 2 or 3. And she described it. Laura Davey, you'll remember, I described it as, she described it as the bee's knees. And I said, what is that? But anyway, she's right. She's right. I have met an extraordinary group of people. I have to say mostly women. Women are the ones who go to support groups. And they have been my mentors. They've been my heroes. They are at all different ranges of their journeys. But no one really, other than they, can know what it's like to walk in my shoes. And so I go to Portsmouth for a support group that is targeted for people with early onset, early stage. I go to Bedford I work full-time, as Dick mentioned, so I have to find evenings and weekends. And they just recently formed a group in Concord that met for the first time a couple of weeks ago. So there are a lot of lessons that I'd like to share, but I don't want to take up more than my fair share of time. There's so much to say. There's so much to learn, and I'm just thrilled to see that so many of you are here to learn from us. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you. Rebecca Rule was a care partner with her father and her mother. She's a humorist and storyteller, and she's been an advocate for caregivers. I think the first time I had an opportunity to hear Rebecca was at Red River Theater probably a year or two ago, where she was speaking and advocating on behalf of care partners. Rebecca?
I'm going to talk about shoes and shoes dropping and walking in people's shoes. My mother was first diagnosed with cancer when she was 70, was rushed to the hospital with a colon blockage, colon cancer. She wouldn't go to the doctor even though she had been feeling poorly for some time. Not until she collapsed on the floor did she go, you know. And we had been planning to go to Red Shoe Barn in Dover to get her some new shoes. And after that, I said, well, we'll go to the shoe barn and get you some new shoes. She said, no. She said, no, I'm not going to live long enough to wear them out. Well, she lived to be 84, and she never did get a new pair of shoes. But, so she had 3 bouts of colon cancer and then a 4th surgery. She was very frail when my father got sick with cancer, and he lived about 4 years with multiple myeloma. So I did my best to try to help him to doctor's appointments and so forth, and to cook for them, and they loved homemade bread. Ma said that she told my father that she didn't like it anymore because he loved it so much. She wanted him to have it all. Had I known, I would have made 2 loaves. But so after Dad died, and during the time that he was sick, he was very angry about being sick. He was a very angry man, not in life, but when he became sick. And so when I went to their house to try to help them, I never knew what I was walking into. And often it was them at each other. After he died, she wanted to stay there. So my husband, my daughter's boyfriend, now her fiance, they're only 37. They've been living together for 13 years. Brings a tear to my eye. Well, we stepped up, and we started visiting twice a week to help her with her chores and shopping. She didn't drive. We started visiting every other day, and in the end, we were visiting every day. Until the shoe dropped. A shoe dropped, and she started calling the police to say that people were coming to her house and spying on her. So they said 24/7, okay. So I moved in, and it wasn't feasible. So after a month, I said, you can come to our house, we want you to live with us. She sat in her chair and she cried, and she said, I want to die in this house. And then she said, I'll give you a week. And after the first week, she said, I'll give you another week. And after a while, she said, I want to sell the house. This is my home now. So she lived with us for about 2 years. About a year in, she fell. And then she had to go to rehab. She broke her pelvis. She had to go to rehab, and then she was wheelchair bound after that. And that's when the then the 24/7 came in, and we would have 1 bell nights when she rang the bell once during the night for us to help her to the bathroom. And some nights were 5 bell nights, and those were the rough ones. But I will say this, and she had shown signs of dementia for a long time, but as you know, it's slow and it comes. And when Dad was sick, I didn't think I thought she was really bad, but then after he died, the stress went away. She was better. She was more herself. But the dementia eventually sort of crept up on her, and especially after the fall. And she became her life became very simple and very narrow from her wheelchair. She loved the cats, she loved the dogs, she loved to eat, and she loved me. And that was real. I would not trade that time with her for anything. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. Wilberto Torres is a care partner for his father. He left his employment to care for his dad full time. Wilberto.
I guess I had everything figured out. I was starting a family. I have now 3 kids, a newborn, and I had a good job. My retirement was kicking ass. It was good times. I took vacations whenever I wanted to, traveled probably more than most people I knew. We have a extensive, well-connected family. We cared for one another. But then my dad got sick. He went to the Dominican Republic. He got a virus over there. We weren't sure what was going on. He basically was a complete vegetable. We brought him to the States. I had to rush and get him and bring him back, and he spent a month in the hospital. Taking him home and not seeing the person you used to see every day, getting support and the laughs, has been the most, obviously, difficult thing ever. I mean, we've been through a lot. We've moved. My parents came to the States probably by questionable means. Struggle through city services and get a good education. Definitely put in our fair share. Then you have kids and the sleepless nights and the constant worry of making sure they grow up to be the best person they can be. It's quite difficult. But you know what? I would say that it compares to nothing at all to having to put your dad to bed and have him cry, realize what's going on, and feel so defenseless. The guilt of not being able to do enough for them. Going through other stages of grief, it's been difficult. Even though there's so many resources and support groups, now we're perhaps in a day and age where we have so many options, it's difficult to decipher what's good or not. And I consider myself well-educated and very resourceful. I like to figure things out on my own, but going through this experience is something that I definitely wasn't prepared. Going through the experience of having family that you spend so many holidays with and share so many good memories, be overwhelmed, and eventually start turning their backs on you is difficult. Yet we expect a complete stranger to come to our homes, perhaps, and provide services, or just check them in a facility and have somebody care for them. It was something that I couldn't live without, so I kept my father home. He's still with us. He's, for our intensive purposes, just a vegetable. He no longer cries. He's just there. There is no time for myself between the kids and dad. And basically, I did end up leaving my job I needed time for me to find new meaning in life and slow things down. It's just too overwhelming. I was lucky to be in a position where I had investments, I had a good plan that had me in a good place, and it could afford me to do so. So I now dedicate myself to be as engaged as possible and learn from the lessons that my parents, perhaps one way or another, found ways to instill in me, and try to share my story with folks. I'm part of the One Greater Nashua leadership, Greater Nashua, several boards, and my mission now is to try to decipher all the resources that we have in place and engage as much as I can with the community that surrounds me so that we can be as prepared as possible, because I definitely got caught and I don't want anybody else to be in the same situation.
Thank you, Wilberto. I just wanted to raise one more thing before we go to Bishnu, is the impact of care partnering and caregiving. And it's can be financial, it can be physical, it can be medical, it can be emotional. And it takes its toll in a lot of different ways. And I think that's why we are so important to help become change agents. Our next speaker is Bishnu Gurung, and Bishnu is a care partner for her mother-in-law. And Bishnu is from Bhutan. And I believe that Bishnu works. And we have as her interpreter Vola Siwakoti, who is going to do interpretation. But Bishnu?
Yes, sir. I was born in Bhutan. I was born in Bhutan. I left 1992 and come Nepal on
Okay, I was born in Bhutan, and we came to Bhutan, Nepal from Bhutan in 1992. We stayed in Nepal over 20 years. And in 2012, we came to Concord in New Hampshire from Nepal, from the refugee camp. My mother-in-law was sick even in refugee camp, and we used different equipments like wheelchair for her to transport here to the United States. And after we came here, we continued for her to use those equipments like wheelchair, and she was suffering from different diseases. In addition to that, and we took her to the hospital and treatments were done, and she was not forgetting as much as she does now. She's losing her memory much more than what she used to do in the past, and she's just though in the family, but she's meshing around children, and they're finding hard time to focus in their studies.
अनि दबाईहरू खुवाउन पनि अब धेरै नै गाह्रो पर्छ होइन कतातिर अब दबाई कता कुनामा लगेर खानुपर्छ भनेर लुकाएर राख्छ
And one thing, it is very hard for her to take the medications, and though we are monitoring, and when we give her medication to take, she just take it and hide somewhere else and does not take.
अनि बच्चा अब ठुलो नानीले अब त्यो एउटा अब मेन्टोरिनी भने उसको एउटा दबाई छ त्यो खुन खाएन भने अब खुन बढ्दैन होइन त्यो उसको घाँटीको अपरेसन गरेपछि चाहिँ रेगुलर दिएको छ होइन महिनापछि चेकअप गराउनुपर्छ अनि त्यो दबाई चाहिँ बिर्सिनु हुँदैन लुकाइहाल्छ त्यो कोही बेला चाहिँ
And my first child is offering help in providing her medication, and after she undergone for a neck surgery, there is a medication that she needs to take continuously so that her blood levels are maintained, and we should not have her miss that medications, and when we give her that medication to take, she always hides somewhere else.
अनि त्यो दबाई अब रेगुलर उहाँ हस्पिटलबाट चाहिँ अब ब्लडहरू महिनापछि अब चेकअप गराउँछ अनि त्यो दबाई अब एक दिन मिक्स भयो भने पनि ब्लड घटिहाल्छ कोही बेला बढ्छ कोही बेला घट्छ
And she is regularly undergoing treatment in the hospital, and if she miss a day of medications, her blood level fluctuates, either it is too high or too low.
अनि त्यो नानीलाई अब अलिक कराउँछ अब कोही बेला अब बोजूले त्यो कराउँछ अनि नानीलाई हप्काउँछ
And sometimes she is so frustrated and she scolds children at home.
अनि बिर्सिने चाहिँ त्यो उसले अब कोही बेला पानीहरू होइन छोडेर त्यो पानीहरू किन छोडेको भन्यो भने ठाडै के हप्काएर आउँछ
And sometimes she forgets to do things after herself, like she opens the tape and forgets to close the tape and let the tapes go running, and when we remind her, our children, when they remind her that, and she starts scolding her, she gets frustrated.
कोही बेला अब स्टभहरू त्यतिकै छोडिन्छ ग्यास छोडिन्छ विशेष कुरा अब हाम्रोमा चाहिँ ग्यास हो त्यो ग्यास भित्रबाट अब भित्रबाट मान्छेलाई थाहा हुँदैन बाहिरको अब ग्यास बनाउँछ अनि ग्यास त छोडिराखेछ त भनेर आयो भने मैले कहाँ छोडेँ ग्यास भन्दै उल्टेको
And sometimes the most part is sometimes she set the fire open like the stove, and so we are not always with her, but we keep eye on her, and sometimes we smell gas in the house, and when we say, who left the oven stove open with the gas is around, and she says, no, I did not do it. She says like that.
अनि त्यहाँ त्यो ग्यासहरू अब त्यो कोही बेला माथि बाथरुममा पानीहरू छोड्छ होइन अनि पानी कराएर आएको हुन्छ अनि पानी कसले छोड्यो भने कहाँ मैले छोडेको छैन भन्दै उल्टे हप्काउँछ
And sometimes she leaves the water running after herself after the bathroom used, or when she used the shower, and she forgets as often as she even does not remember when you remind her, did you leave the bathroom or the water open? She says, no, I did not. So she already forgot it.
अनि भन्यो भने अब एकदम कोही बेला फुत्तै निस्केर हिँड्छ होइन चिसो अब चिप्लो बाटो कोही बेला हिउँ परेको हुन्छ होइन ननिस्किनु अब उसको लौरोहरू सबै छ नि त टेकेर हिँड्दैन सट्टै निस्केर सट्टै कहाँ एक फन्का घुमिरहेको हुन्छ
And sometimes she escapes the house and she does not let anybody, and suddenly goes out of the house. And what worries me most is the weather outside. Sometimes it is snowing, sometimes raining. She doesn't care, just escape. And she also has her cane. She does not use that, and she suddenly escapes the house and struggling outside without using it.
पहिला पनि त्यो लडेर उसको अब ढाँडा अब हाम्रो जस्तो सर्कुलर छैन उसको अब सिधा कुप्रै परेर हिँड्छ होइन अनि कोही बेला त्यो धेरै हिँड्नु पनि सक्दैन तर नि ऊ अब रहर गर्छ तर लौरो चाहिँ टेकेर हिँड्नुपर्छ है अब त्यो दिएको छ हस्पिटलबाट लौरो त्यो टेकेर हिँड्नुपर्छ भन्दा टेक्दैन कोही बेला उल्टै रिसाउँछ
And she fell in the past, and she had problem with her back, and now she is always bending down, cannot straight herself, and she is provided cane, but she sometimes forgets to use it or sometimes does not like to use it. So she's having issues around there too.
यो कोही बेला चाहिँ अब बढी नै रिसाउँछ हैन राति अब नानीहरू पढिरहेको हुन्छ अनि अब बोलिरहँदा बढी बोल्छ हैन अनि नबोल्नु भन्दाखेरि अब म बोल्दा के भयो म धेरै भयो म बोल्दा भन्छ अब हैन नानीहरूलाई डिस्टर्ब हुन्छ अब किन धेरै बोल्नु कोही बेला अब सुत्दैन रातभरि अब त्यतिकै बोलिरहन्छ.
And sometimes she is so frustrated and keeps talking, and when she is reminded, can you not talk by the children when they are reading, and she gets so frustrated, and what goes wrong when I'm talking or mumbling? Am I too much, or am I a burden in the family? And she gets frustrated like that, and also sometimes she does not go to sleep and she always talks in the sleep, and that the other children who has to go to school in the morning gets disturbed.
अनि अब आफूलाई सबै साथीहरू अब काममा के गर्छ आफ्नो अब काम पनि अब सबैको फुल टाइम काम छ अनि आफ्नो चाहिँ अब काम छैन त्यो अब हेरिरहनु पर्यो हैन अनि छोडेर अब कहीँ मिल्दैन आगोहरू छोड्ने डर हुन्छ त्यो.
And people from the community of my age, everybody else is working. I had to save that time so that I can care for my mom, and my mom or my mother-in-law needs attention all the time, that we cannot, and I don't have resources well trusted enough so that I can live and go work. And that's all.
Thank you, Bishnu. We have 1 minute left, and that's sort of a rescue in some respects for myself, because I'll ask one question, and I'll ask it, and anybody can respond. But I'm going to look at Rebecca because I have a disadvantage, or I have an advantage. We had a telephone conversation earlier, a week or so ago, and Rebecca said something that just sort of stuck with me, and then I had another conversation with another person, and it was all about asking for help, how difficult it was to ask for help. And Rebecca, can you respond to that?
Well, just as my mother had difficulty asking for help, you could call her stubborn, I also thought that I had it under control. And even though, as Vishnu said, it's unrelenting, it's always a new problem, always looking to the next meal, to the next doctor's appointment, to the next, it's like being on a treadmill. You lose track of time. That seemed like it was okay, because this was a new way of living. After Ma fell and went into a wheelchair, we had people came to the house for rehab, and they were wonderful. And at one point, a social worker sat with my daughter and me in the dining room and said, there's other help that you can get. You can get people to come in, and they can help you with your mom and in the morning and with the chores. I'm like, no, we have got it under control. And I left the room, and my daughter later said to me that she looked at the social worker and said, we need help. And once the help started coming, then I realized that we had needed help, and just even to be able to go to the grocery store, to get in the car and drive 5 minutes to the grocery store, all of a sudden became possible, and it really was a huge, huge help. We called them the girls. The girls would come, and the only one my mother didn't like was the one that had to stick her finger, and she would wheel herself into her room to hide, but we always found her.
No, okay. I bet you did. Any other thoughts on asking for help? Because I think we're going to wrap up. And number one, I just want to thank the panelists for sharing some very personal information about their care partnering, their caregiving. They're very, very special people. And when you look at the foundations of caregiving and care partnering, It really begins with that thing that we use the word fairly loosely sometimes, love. We love, we have passion, we care, we have the willingness to give the very, very special gift of self. And these people really exemplify that sharing and that giving of self to make the balance a little bit more stable and to make life a little bit easier for all of us. So one more thing.
Sorry.
Okay.
Is that okay? This is not a commercial, but I was remiss in not mentioning the hand-holding that we have received from the Alzheimer's Association. And it's very important that people understand the resources that are available there, because it is 24/7 as far as their hotline is concerned. They have educational programs. They have, one-on-one consultation, and they have an amazing website. There's no limit to the information that you can find there. And so I really want to be certain anyone who is looking, and it's not just Alzheimer's, it's any form of dementia, to avail themselves of, or avail yourselves of the resources of the Alzheimer's Association. And I specifically want to thank Melissa Grenier, who is heading up the New Hampshire chapter, for all her work. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I think that's a very important point. I think there are some folks that are outside the room of different resources that are available. I think it's important to look at those. And you may say, gee, it's not me, but it's somebody you know. And I think that's a very powerful gift that you can give, a little bit of respite, a little bit of caring, a little bit of sharing. So thank all of you so very much.